Today's another video about making decisions, and this video is going to be a little bit different from the previous videos I've done. So I have gotten a viewer request to show how do we design generic document creation and decisions. And because in order to create this generic document creation, the flows and the steps and all the things that I've used to create this, I've made available in the description section. There's going to be a link to a Google Drive that contains the project and contains the HTML setup for this application. And so that will be your kind of guiding light if you want to kind of follow along or understand what I'm trying to do or how I've set up this flow. So I'm going to kind of briefly go through the entire main flow. I'll show you what it does and its function, and then I'll walk through the individual flows that make it up. And now again, this shows a user utilizing a lot of the string builder steps in decisions. So if you don't know what those steps are, I would advise you to pause this video and go and watch my previous video that I created over string builder steps in decisions, because I use them a lot here. Now, this isn't the only way to do generic document creation. There probably is another way that you can do it. This is the way that I have designed. So without further ado, let's just go into the project. So what happens is I have a generic document that gets created here. And I have a data repeater here that allows me to add different pieces of data. So let's say I have a long-term plan, the year activity. I'm just going to give some test data. I'm going to say this is like $6,000. We'll do this as $6,000. And I'm just going to copy some of the same data just so it could be easy for me to keep track of. And I'm going to do a short-term plan, and let's say this is test 4, and I'm going to say this is 5,000. I'm just going to copy this here, and then I'm going to add 2 more pieces of data. I'm going to use November 11th. None of this data really matters. I'm just showing you how this process is set up and what will happen. So let's say this is 2,500. I mean, you can use any values you want. Like I said, I'm just using test data for this. There we go. I'm going to use this one, and let's say I'm going to do 7,000 for this, and let me make sure that I add some type of test. So test 6. So now you can easily configure this data repeater to allow you to enforce rules that all the pieces of data need to be filled. But the coolest thing about this is if I click this refresh button here, notice it refreshes this PDF file here and adds in those values that were in the data repeater in here. And it gives you the total long term. So the total long terms that I have, Decisions Intelligently, sums just the long term plans up here and tells you the total value of the net value, which is here. So the net value is here. And then the change in value, which is here. And then the total short term plans, which are located here for $12,000 for net value and $12,000 for the change in value, because I left the numbers the same. And then because I'm using a document viewer in decisions, I can easily download this. So I'm going to put this to my downloads folder, and then I can open up this test file PDF, and then I can see in a PDF file this document that I've just created in decisions with these values. So a lot of application that could be found here. Now I could remove said data and then refresh, and then decisions will update the total amount of short term and long term if I remove one of those. So it allows you to have a lot of flexibility. So this is what this project does. It allows you to add, remove data, and then create a document with the financial plans and summarize the long-term plans or different pieces of data within. How do we create this? Well, the first one, the flow that we'll begin, is the document creation flow. And if you've downloaded this project and exported it in your environment, you can follow along. I have this document creation flow. And in this document creation flow, I have a couple of steps that I use to create this process. The first one is I create a file. Now, this is just flow data that I need to have access to so that I can write this file into this in-session form that we have at the end. So the first thing I do is create a file. I set it to a constant, and I just have an output rename variable called new file. The purpose of this is just to have a file so the in-session form can display like when I run it. So if I debug this, that file is just this blank file that appears here with these tables and headers. Alrighty. So now the first thing I do is I need to use the create string builder step. And I've already explained what this step does. It allows me to utilize the string builder in decisions and append text. Specifically what I do here is I append the create table tag in decisions. And notice that the input for this tag right here is I have a certain table style. The reason why I have that certain table style is because it allows the project to have the table formatted in such a way where it's even and it fits across the page and it's evenly spaced in between the different columns. So that's why I did that there. All right. So I first appended the first table tag, which is the opening tag of the style. Then you're going to pop into the subflow. After it runs over there, you're going to go into this create document preparer subflow. Now what does this do? It is just a subflow that takes in string builder data because I need to pass in that string builder output from this step into this subflow. So it just takes in this piece of data. And then when I go edit it, what I do is I just say, hey, I need to grab a couple of string lists, right? Now I've set it up to grab the current user email and then the flow start time formatting short date, and then the start time of year, statement. So basically it's the flow current year and the flow date short date, and then the current user email. You could adjust this to make sure that it has any relevant metrics. So if you want actually another in-session form to pop up to say, hey, I want to pick the year, I want to pick the financial plan or the quarter, you can create an in-session form to do that. You just have to place it in a convenient part of the process. But anyway, this is how I set it up. And then what I do is I just for each those elements, and then what I say is I append some text to it. And so what I do is I append the item and BR. The reason why I do this is because I append that item in BR is because it allows me to create the kind of column layout where it stacks on top of each other. So to show how this looks like in action when I start the debugger, I'm going to minimize this. So when I go to create document prepare, you're going to see this. So what happens is I say, hey, let me create this admindecisions.com and break. And it does this 3 times. And what happens is it creates the text for its own line. So admin decisions has its own line. The year and the short date has its own line. And then the statement has its own line. Now you may be asking, how did you get the big blank space over here? How I did that is at the end, after the loop's done, what I did is I said, hey, I want to append a couple of break tags, which in HTML, for those of you who are familiar with HTML will know this, but for those of you who are not, all the break tag does is it adds extra space to the document. So it's like me pressing enter on my keyboard a couple of times. So that's what I told Decisions to do. I can make that space larger or smaller. So if that's too big, I can just remove a couple of these break tags, and then I can have it to where it's smaller or closer. So that's what I did there. After I did the document preparer step, the next thing that I have to do is I need to create these headers, right? So all of these kind of table headers, that has to be created because that's what's going to be held underneath the different rows underneath those headers. So how did I do that? What I did here is we're going to edit the subflow, and notice I'm already passing in a constant list of date of grant, plan, year activity, options granted, options outstanding, net value. So I'm just passing a string list. There is a way if you want to do this by a data structure. So if I get object properties. There is an actual step. Get property names on object. So what this allows you to do is, let's say if you have a decisions data structure and you want all of the column headers or the data members as strings, you can use this step to get that piece of data if you so choose this way. Now, I opted out not to do it this way because it was just easier. I already knew what string list I needed, so that's why I just kind of manually typed it in. But in your case, if you want to create a dynamic scalable solution, you can use that get property names on object. That's what would help you get there. All right, so I create the headers. Now, what's in this create headers flow? Now, what's in this create header flow is you're going to see it's very similar to the create document preparer. What I do here is I just say, hey, let me append the table row tag. So in my HTML, let me pull that up so you guys can see that generic HTML. So here, what I'm doing is I'm creating a table row, and I'm saying, hey, here are the table headers for it. And that's what's happening in this loop. It's saying, hey, write this row. And then when you're done with data grant, get the next string in the list, write this row. And then when you're done with that one in the list, write this row. That's essentially what's happening programmatically in decisions. And then I'm appending the opening and closing tag in decisions. Now, I could have easily done this by using the append HTML. There's a one step append line with tags. I could have used this step to kind of saved myself, where I only have to use one step instead of 3 steps. So this would have been a better way for me to handle that. But with how my mind was thinking when I was designing it, I had to see it individually. But I could have just used this one step and defined the table, th style, padding, here's the text, and then the closing tag for it. So that's just kind of something to be aware of if you ever wonder why I did it this way. It was just how I was thinking about it, so that's why my mind developed it that way. And then I have the closing tag for the table row. So when I go back here, so I finish this. This is another table style. I finish all of them. Then I'm just adding my closing table row tag. So that whole flow writes this block of text right here. That's the only purpose of this entire flow, is just to write this text for the column headers. And then after that, I think I then close the table. So that's what those two flows do. It creates a table, creates the headers, and then it closes the table. And that's what I'm doing there. If you want to see that in action, so don't save, I'm going to debug this so you can see that in action. So when I go to create headers, you see that it hits this 7 times. It creates the tag with a style, and then it adds the corresponding text into it. So options granted, it added that in there. So that's what happened on that one. And then here, this is where I just close the, oops, let me not disconnect that. Here's where I just close the table tag. And then after I close the table tag, we have another big piece of the project here. So let's debug this. So the other thing you need to be aware of is, how did I get this line right here, right? How did I get that line? Well, in HTML, that is known as what we call the HR tag, which is basically a horizontal line. And what the HR tag does is it makes a horizontal line for pretty much the entire width of the page. But what I did is I used certain parameters to style it a certain way, so it only goes over the net value and the change in value portions of this document. So let's look through that here. So what I did is, on this step, on the append HR tag, I gave it some attributes. This is what we call the stuff that you put in between the actual tag name and then the right arrow. So I had these attributes to limit its size to only go to a certain length, and its height was only 1 pixel, and then also the color would be black. You can change the color to whatever you want, and you can research that online on how to do that. I left it black. So this is how I parameterize that HR tag. So that's what goes on there. Okay, so that explains how I got this little line right here. Now we're going to go, how do we get the long-term and then the currency values over here? Well, that goes into both these two subflows. They both do the exact same thing, if they just take in a different string input. So this one takes in a total long-term value, and this one takes in a total short-term value. It also takes in a list of financial plans. This is a custom data structure type that I created called financial plans. And I'm going to show you that real quick. And what this type is, I believe it's just a flow structure. Yeah. Since I didn't want to save any data to a database, I just wanted to show how we orient and create documents generically in decisions. That's why I don't have a, say, storable data structure. I just have a simple flow structure that displays these data members. And so both of those flows take in a constant value of that, where everything's kind of defaulted to 0 because there's no data. The user has not added anything into it. All right. So I'm going to show you one of these flows because the other flow does the exact same thing. It's just the value is different. So in the total long-term subflow, what happens here is I sum up the net value. So it's a kind of a little bit that goes on here. I sum up the net value, which is a list of decimal values. I sum them all up. I sum up the change value. And then what I do is I create another table below the table that we just created. So now I'm in the section here where we create a table that's aligned, a table that's aligned to the right, and the width of the table is 65%. And that's where I add in these table headers again, which gives you the sum of the net value, which in this case is the currency output. And then I use the merge plain text editor here to write that text. So we got that here. The reason why I did this, you may ask, why did you use the merge plain text editor here? The reason why I use the merge plain text editor here is because I needed to grab the sum or these net value outputs, and they needed to be variables. But I didn't need just those variables. I also needed to be able to place some HTML text to format it the way I wanted. So that's why I did it that way. And I organized it the way I did. Did the same thing for the change in value. It just grabs the sum of change in value, output, and currency. But both of those steps look exactly the same. Right here, I've labeled these two steps for appending the th tag for the value and the th tags for the sum net value and change in value. And then here I close the table. And that's how I get that part. Now, let's not save this. Now, after I do the total long-term value, so what I just talked through is I just did this part. Now you may be asking, how did I do this other line right here? I have another line underneath this table. How did I do that? Well, that's going to be found out in these steps right here. In order to format that line in the way that I wanted it to, I actually created another table that just contains the horizontal line. So I have a whole table row and a whole table data, style padding right, with the HR tag. You can see that located here with the attributes that I needed. And then I closed the table data and the table row tag. So that's what I'm doing there. And that's what allowed me to have that line underneath. Let me open that format again. That's what allowed me to have this line underneath right here because I did it that way. So that line, what I did here is that's all of this. So that's what those 3 steps do. It does that much. And then I finally close the table. Now, same thing with the total short term. I just created another table underneath it. And it does the same thing minus the line steps. It's basically the total long-term table row, except for these 3 steps. It doesn't have these 3 steps because there's no need for another line. So that's what both of those subflows do. Then finally, I use my toHTML text because anytime I use the string builder step and I'm manipulating HTML text, I need to convert that string builder data into HTML readable text that I can send to other places, and then format it in a readable HTML format so that it can be viewed by end users. If you don't know what this step does, go back and watch my creating or using string builder steps and decisions. I go into detail what that does. And then finally, after I'm done with that string builder, I'm going to close the string builder entirely because I don't need to use it. And after I close it, the final step before I get to the in session form is now what I do is I say, hey, I want to take this toHTML text, which is this whole output right here. And what I want to do is I want to select from flow from that input here. And I'm going to take the toHTML text output, which is literally this entire block of text right here That's what all of this is. It takes this entire block of text and then says convert that HTML. Let me push it. Convert this HTML into a readable PDF. And so that's what happens. And then I give it the name testfile.pdf. If you're ever trying to build this, make sure you add the .pdf in the file name. If you don't, Decisions is going to create a file that's not going to be a readable file because it didn't give it a file extension. So that's why you need to tell Decisions what type of file it is so that it could be readable in that format. If you just leave it as a string name, then it won't give it a file type association. It'll just be a type file that cannot really be read in a human readable form. So make sure you add the .pdf as the file name. And then what I did is I told it to change the value of the new file. So remember, I instantiated a file right here. So I just wanted to create a file that I could manipulate at the beginning. I technically didn't have to, but I did. That's how I set it up. I could have just used this as a rename and mapped it into the data file here, but I chose just to instantiate the file at the beginning, just in case if I, at the beginning of my flow, needed to do some changes to it. Okay, and then that's what happens. So then when I debug, that's when I have all of this happen. And then I can, and that's the flow that runs all of this where it comes up with this screen. Now, the next part that you're going to be asking is, how did you get it to take the values from the data repeater, right? How did you take the values from the data repeater and how did you have that displayed and update the values in the, I'll just remove this one, and to have it update the values in the file? How did you do that? Well, how I did that is this, on this form, this refresh button, it is a event button. It's a type of button that you can use in Decisions to trigger a flow. How was that one created? Well, let me show you. I will show you how that one was created. That one was created because I went into my form and I have this refresh button. And what this refresh button does is it actually triggers this generate document active form flow. So when I click edit on this and then I say edit create document, you're going to notice it does a lot of the same things that the initial create flow does. But the difference is it contains the data from the form now. So what I do is the first thing I need to do is I need to filter out the LT and the ST plans. So how did I do that? So I'm not going to talk through all of this stuff because all of this stuff right here is literally the exact same steps that we just talked about. The only difference that this flow has from the main flow is that I filter out both the long-term plans from the short-term plans in this financial planning situation. How did I do that? Well, I'm going to edit this financial plan right here, and notice it just contains a rule collection filter steps. And what it does is it says, hey, with this rule collection filter step, I need to return both the matches and the non-matches of the list of financial plans that I get from the data repeater, which is the input of the step. So form, data, repeater, item source. I'm grabbing all that data when the user clicks the refresh button. I'm passing it in here, and I'm telling Decisions to say, hey, I want you to filter out with the rule collection filter step. With this rule, I want you to filter out the entity plan that contains LT. And then what I want you to do is return both the matches and the non-matches. So this is a really cool thing in the rule collection filter step that allows you to say, hey, I want to filter out these long-term plans, but I want you to return to me the long-term plans and the short-term plans in two separate list variables. And then what I do at the end step is I output those list of financial plans. So the non-matches in this case, since the entity plan, if the entity plan does not equal LT, it would be considered a non-match. And so I have it mapped to the ST plans. And the one where the entity plan equals LT, which is what I was looking for in my edit rule for my rule collection filter, I'm going to output that in the rule collection output step here. And so now when I go back into this flow, I'm just, what am I doing? I'm just using the create string builder step. I'm creating the document preparers. I'm getting the admin, the current users, appending the table style. Notice I'm doing the exact same thing as I did earlier. Just the difference being is now I have data. So instead of this being a constant, I pass in the short-term plans for the create short-term sub-data table row. And then for the long-term plans, create the total long-term, and I pass in the list of LT plans for the financial plan here. So that's literally all I'm doing. And literally all this does is it shows, so I have this text document to show you kind of what decisions are doing programmatically. And what I just talked through was the HTML formatted with data. So I ran through, this was when I had a couple of pieces of data into it. And all I'm doing is I'm just placing those pieces of data within the table data tags of HTML. And then when I'm done with it, then I'm passing this entire string to the HTML, to HTML text. I'm passing it here into the HTML PDF. And then now what I'm doing is how do I update then that document viewer that I'm using? What I do is the output of the HTML to PDF step, since there's no in-session form, since this is running as an active form flow, I can just say, hey, I want you to change the form data.document viewer value. So what this does is I click on it, it reruns this HTML and writes all of the values that need to be put in between those HTML tags. And then it says, hey, now update the document to reflect those changes that the user has added in the data repeater. So that's what's going on in a nutshell with this project. It takes a little bit of getting used to and a little bit of talking through, but when you talk through it, you can see it's a fairly simple project. It's not complicated at all, because all I'm doing is I'm just using decisions to write HTML and create documents. And so it's not too hard once you get used to the hang of what I'm doing, because I'm not doing a lot of different things. What I did when you run the main flow is the same thing that I did with the active form flow. The only difference is I'm just now having data placed in those, in between these tags right here, and summing those values up, and that's it. I don't have to do anything else. So that's what's going on here, which I think I do that here. Oh yeah, so I already have that. I already talked through that. So I just take the financial plan, all net value, and sum it up. So I'm using the exact same flow again here because I've created it scalably, so I can apply it here and pass in those values, whether it's I have a lot of values or no values. It turns out to be the same. So, but that is the generic document creation in Decisions. I hope you guys find this helpful. Again, I'm going to leave a link to a publicly shared Google Drive that's going to contain the Decisions export of this project and the HTML notepad, so you guys can see how the HTML is set up programmatically in Decisions. But that's pretty much it in a nutshell. You just design your document however way you see fit, and then you just let Decisions take care of the rest. Let Decisions sum up those values. Let Decisions format that HTML for you, so that when you actually have some data that you want to display and use for your end users, you can run it this way and hit refresh, and now it can populate that document for you. I do want to caveat the project. The project is to be used for instructional purposes only. This is not a production-ready, full-fledged tested application. This is merely to show Decisions users how you can create decisions to create dynamic invoices and documents for your process. I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you guys next time.